On the 17th of November 1913, two unidentified women were admitted into the New Norfolk Insane Asylum after they were found wandering naked through the streets of West Hobart, Tasmania, where locals believed they had been living in isolation. Both women were discovered in disturbingly ghastly conditions. The older woman, who was assumed to be the mother, had clawed her eyes out, and her entire left ear was missing. The younger woman bore several self-inflicted lacerations across her body. Most of her fingernails had been ripped out, a morbid act that also seemed to be self-inflicted, and she had bitten off portions of her tongue. The asylum's medical records showed that it took several men to subdue them, as the women screamed incessantly, repeating the name Jones in pure terror. Due to their terrified states, both women were sedated before being transported on the 40-minute journey to the New Norfolk Insane Asylum, where they would remain for the rest of their lives. The older woman soon fell into a coma and died a year and a half later. The younger woman, whom the doctors believed to be her daughter despite the lack of identification papers, survived but never spoke a word to anyone. The doctors at the asylum carried out a series of extensive tests and examinations during the initial days following their arrival. They discovered abnormally high concentrations of tropane alkaloids in their systems, toxic compounds commonly found in Datura stramonium, also known as Datura flowers, or the devil's trumpet. The origin of these foreign compounds perplexed the doctors, as they wondered where they could have come from and why the women had consumed them in such large amounts. The doctors were unable to answer these questions due to the comatose state of the mother before her passing and her daughter's continued muteness. After the death of her mother, the younger woman remained silent for 5 long years, despite numerous attempts by the doctors to get her to communicate. However, on one fateful day, she broke her silence, not with words, but by scribbling bizarre phrases and nonsensical sentences across the walls and bedsheets of her ward. Even though the doctors had wanted her to communicate for so long, they were deeply disturbed by the manner in which she chose to share her thoughts, as the young woman had written these messages using her own blood, drawn from several open wounds she'd inflicted on herself by violently biting into her own fingers with her teeth. The doctors sedated her again, fearing she might further harm herself. However, they understood she was trying to tell them something. So when she came to, they handed her a pen and a piece of paper. Initially, most of her writings were gibberish, but over time they became coherent, and she was able to tell them through her notes that her name was Amelia. The doctors noted that Amelia wrote for hours on end each day, and buried amongst all her scribblings was the story of a truly horrific madhouse, one that had led her to the asylum and the tragic state she now found herself in. One of Amelia's earliest recollections, found in her many notes, began like this. "We needed to get away from him. It was our only chance at survival. We knew it was only a matter of time before he found us hiding in Grandma's old house, and when he did, he'd drag us back to the hell we just escaped. Mother had some savings, along with the small inheritance Nan left behind. She put the money together and bought a remote house in a secluded part of West Hobart, where he'd never find us. That house was where we planned to start again, where we'd build our new and happy lives far out of his reach. Unfortunately, our happiness only lasted for a few months before the familiar devil sniffed us out and started tormenting us again. I still remember how happy Mother looked during those early months. We made the house our own. We placed chairs out in the backyard and installed a rainwater tank beside the beautiful wildflowers that surrounded us. Those months were the very first time we'd felt safe in a long time. But one night after I'd come out to get a glass of water, I saw a familiar shadow outside through the window. I screamed and dropped the glass, which shattered and woke up my mother. When we went out to inspect the area, no one was there. My mother tried to calm me down, saying that I was just nervous and seeing things that weren't there. But while we didn't know it at the time, She was wrong, and the familiar horrors I thought we had escaped were just starting again. I began to see the same familiar silhouette around the house during the days that followed that night. It wasn't long before my mother noticed it too, and we didn't need anyone to tell us what was going on. We knew he had found us. The person I'm referring to was a man named Jones Walker. I was told he was my father, but I never really knew him as that. In all of my earliest memories of him, there isn't a single one where he wasn't striking my mother. I would later realize that this had been going on since I was an infant, and Mother would throw herself in front of my small body whenever Jones wanted to take his anger out on me for crying. Unlike the many other couples I came across, my mother never referred to him as her husband, or even honey. She just called him Jones, and I learned to do the same. I can't remember how many times I asked my mother when I was older why she didn't just leave him and run away with me. She often told me that the only reason she stayed was because she owed him a debt she could never repay. However, I would later learn that this was a big lie, as my father had threatened to kill me in front of her if she ever left him. On some nights, she would shield me from his beatings until she collapsed, and on other nights, I would be the one shielding her. My grandparents often tried to get involved, but my mother didn't allow them to, as she knew it would only lead to more problems and more beatings. Things went on like this for most of my life, until one night when Jones hit me so hard that I stopped moving for a few minutes. While I didn't know for sure, I'm assuming seeing me lie motionless was enough to give my mother the courage to run, as she realized that he may one day carry out his morbid threat, whether she left him or not. It took some time and a lot of planning, but we eventually did it and escaped. However, he had found us this time, and there was nowhere left to go. He camped outside our home for a few days, making sure we couldn't leave to get help before making his move. There were several times when we thought we should make a run for it, as the food inside the house had run out and the only thing we had left was water. But we both knew without a doubt that he would kill us the instant we stepped outside. Despite locking all the doors and the largest locks we could find, as we planned to wait him out, he somehow got inside our home. He seemingly appeared out of nowhere, next to my bed one night, and he looked at me and said, "Did you forget what I told you, Amelia? I truly despise the sight of unkept women in front of me. So why are your nails still so long?" I tried to run and get away from him, but he got hold of my hands and took out rusty pliers from his pocket as he began to rip out my nails one by one. It wasn't long before my screams attracted my mother, but he didn't even give her a chance to say anything. The second she stepped into my room, he slammed her to the floor. He then brought out a jagged knife as he asked my mother, "How many times did I tell you this is what would happen if you ever left me, Emily? How many times? I'm beginning to wonder if your ears are just on the sides of your head for decoration, and I don't think you need them because you never listen." Without hesitation, Jones then took off one of my mother's ears with his blade. I tried to do something, anything, but I could do nothing but writhe in pain on the floor as the unimaginable agony I felt after he'd ripped out 4 of my fingernails didn't allow me to move my legs. I can still remember the sinister smile on his face as I wondered what kind of person could be this evil. My mother's screams were deafening now, but he kept on screaming at her as he said, "Remember how I promised to kill her in front of you if you ever left me. You know I'm a man who keeps my promises. But I'm not going to let you watch her die. I'll take your eyes out so you can only hear the thing you called my daughter die." There are no words to describe the morbid scenes that followed. I can recall calling out to God or anyone to help us and stop this devil, but nothing happened, and Jones took out each of my mother's eyes before leaving her to bleed out on the floor. He then turned his focus on me as he dropped the knife and took out his pliers again to finish taking out my remaining fingernails. I passed out at some point, and when I came to, he was still there. But this time he was holding the bloody knife again as he said, "Not only are you unkept, but you are also indecent. Why are you showing so much skin? It's such a shame to know I fathered a whore. But I'll teach you a lesson that'll always remind you to keep yourself like a decent woman." He then slowly cut me all over my body with his knife and laughed as I screamed and cried. After what seemed like an eternity, he got frustrated and started yelling, "Why are you screaming so much? It's infuriating. It reminds me of the days when you were a baby and did nothing but scream and get on my nerves. I really wanted to rip your head off or snap your neck. And one night I planned to cut off your tongue, but your stupid mother didn't let me. But I guess there's no one to stop me now, and I can finally have some peace and quiet." I could do nothing as he forced my mouth open and reached for my tongue. He started to take pieces off the tip of my tongue with the same knife, and I begged death to take me. But before it could, my mother, whom I thought was dead, struck him with a nearby lamp and pushed him off me while telling me to run. It took every single thing I had, and I bolted out of the room. But it wasn't long before I realized my mother wasn't following me. The blow she gave him wasn't enough to make him unconscious, and I started hearing her scream again as I ran out of the house. Eventually her scream stopped, and the last time I saw my mother was when my father came running out of our once happy home, holding her severed head. As I ran further down the road, I wondered why the world hated me so much and took away every shred of happiness I'd ever felt. There was a part of me that wanted to be struck down by a vehicle so that the darkness could take me, because even though my legs were running, I didn't know what I was running towards, and I began to question if my life had any meaning at all. I asked myself if my mother should have survived instead of me, as even though I knew I didn't make Jones the way he was, I was the sole reason why she stayed and suffered so much. Amelia's tragic story usually ended at this point, as her records show that when she reached this part of her tale, she would start all over from the beginning. While these notes served as a window into Amelia's psyche, her doctors were extremely skeptical about the authenticity of these scribblings. Their initial hypothesis was that both women hallucinated the whole thing, even the existence of the man they called Jones, while somehow carrying out these morbid acts on themselves. There had already been several records of people clawing their own eyes out, as several cases of self-enucleation, mostly from religious delusions and psychotic episodes, had already occurred. Other doctors argued that while they believed the extremely abusive man Amelia called Jones did exist, and that she and her mother had escaped from him, the terrible acts they described were all self-inflicted after suffering serious psychosis due to the unusual amounts of tropane alkaloids discovered in their systems. These toxic compounds were known to cause serious effects, such as hallucinations, and a high intake could lead to a coma, or in some cases, death. Their theory was further confirmed in Amelia's notes, as every time she started the story over, the ending kept changing with each rewrite. At the end of some of her later notes, her father came out holding his mother's torso, and in others, he came out holding her eyes. Despite their extreme details, most of the doctors found some of the events to be wildly exaggerated. In addition to all this, the examinations had also proved they had done this to themselves, as pieces of Emily's eyeballs were found under her fingernails, proving she took them out herself, and the missing parts of Amelia's tongue were also confirmed to have been bitten off by her teeth, rather than cut with a knife. The most glaring issue was also how Amelia believed her mother was killed by her father in their house, when in reality, she died almost 2 years later, after they'd been found. Despite all their theories, the doctors all came to the conclusion that the hallucinations were caused by the continued digestion of those toxic compounds, and they were further fueled by the women's past trauma, which caused them to unfortunately carry out these morbid acts on themselves while believing they were being attacked. However, the question still remained. Where did they acquire these toxic compounds? And why did they eat them? A few doctors believe that they would have had to be eating datura flowers or frequently adding them to their meals under the belief that these flowers were edible. Amelia had mentioned beautiful wildflowers growing around them, and the doctors wondered if those flowers she referenced were the same datura flowers that caused both mother and daughter to go mad. These questions were never answered, though, as Amelia never responded to any of the doctor's questions about these flowers. She just kept writing the same story with slightly different endings over and over again. Amelia wrote these stories till she was 81 years old. She had written and rewritten the story so many times at this point that there were enough pages to fill 40 books. Some of the doctors at the asylum had even started putting her writings together and began referring to them as Amelia's Madhouse. Amelia finally stopped scribbling the same story down when she couldn't keep her hands steady anymore, and she later passed away on the 13th of February, 1974. Like many other old files from this period, the complete records of Amelia's case were mostly lost to time after the New Norfolk Insane Asylum, which was later known as the Royal Derwent Hospital, was officially closed down in the year 2000 after operating for about 170 years in New Norfolk, Tasmania, Australia. Most of her story only survived through word of mouth from former asylum staff and a few locals. However, about 20 to 30 years after Amelia's death, there was an urban legend going around in West Hobart, Tasmania, about a house that made anyone living in it go mad. The urban legend of the Mad House, located in West Hobart, Tasmania, grew to greater heights in the late 80s and mid-90s. Investigations were carried out, and it was revealed that the madness the individuals experienced was caused by datura flowers dropping into an overgrown water tank that had been concealed in the yard. Apparently, all residents of the house were unintentionally ingesting microdoses of the datura plant. The continuous ingestion and microdosing eventually led to copious amounts of these toxic compounds in their systems, which later caused all individuals to slowly lose their minds and sanity. Despite these revelations, a few people still don't believe this urban legend ever happened due to its age and lack of evidence. While many residents of West Hobart, Tasmania, have claimed to have heard of and even seen the house that makes its residents run mad, others are more skeptical, as some residents have claimed West Hobart has gotten their water from a reticulated town water supply since the 19th century, making the use of a rainwater tank at the supposed madhouse seem doubtful. Another person who claimed he hadn't heard of the legend before was unconvinced that the people at the house ran mad from datura poisoning, as he believed that even if the people living in the house were microdosing on the datura flower droppings, they wouldn't have gone mad because that wasn't how anticholinergic poisoning worked. Most of the opposing claims stated the urban legend was fake and have already been rebutted, as despite West Hobart having a reticulated water supply, not all residents used it. A 2011-2012 report indicated that approximately 23% of Tasmanian households used rainwater tanks as their primary water source. Even though the use of rainwater tanks for drinking water in urban areas was less common, it was not unheard of, as much older properties, particularly those situated on the outskirts of town, still used them. Other experts have also proven that in that scenario, anticholinergic poisoning did happen, as there have been several documented cases of unintentional poisoning due to accidental ingestion of datura-contaminated food or water, which can cause toxicity when ingested. This is due to datura plants such as Datura stramonium, containing tropane alkaloids like scopolamine and atropine. The most plausible theory going around now, due to the little that survived from Amelia's old New Norfolk Insane Asylum patient records, is that after the house had been abandoned by Amelia and her mother, Emily, in 1913, it was later found, repossessed, and sold by the state. The house was then refurbished and rented out again in the late 80s and mid-90s, while retaining the same rainwater tank system, since the tank was still functional and allowed for potential cost savings. It is also believed that the new property owners considered the tank a valuable asset, given its historical value, and chose to maintain the existing infrastructure despite how old it was. It was later removed after the revelations of the datura poisoning. Even with this substantial theory, it has never been confirmed if Amelia's house was the same West Hobart house that caused its residents to go mad. Also, due to most of Amelia's story being shared by word of mouth throughout the years, some of the details might be called into question. However, regardless of whether you believe it all happened or if the legend is true or not, the West Hobart, Tasmania madhouse urban legend has to be one of the most fascinating urban legends I've ever come across. When we first pulled up to 657 Boulevard, I swear it felt like a dream. The kind of house you see in magazines. Tall white columns, a wraparound porch, and enough windows to swallow sunlight whole. My husband Daniel squeezed my hand and said, "This is it, Claire. Our forever home." We'd worked years for this. 2 kids in the back seat, boxes full of memories, and hearts swollen with the kind of hope that only comes with fresh paint and new beginnings. The neighbors waved politely as we moved in. One even brought over a pie, something that made me laugh because it felt so movie-like. But I should have known. Stories that start perfect rarely stay that way. On our second night after the kids fell asleep, I went outside to grab a package left by the door. That's when I noticed it. A plain white envelope. No stamp, no address. Just the words, "Welcome home." I thought it was a neighborly gesture at first, maybe a note from the Homeowners Association, but the handwriting, it was old-fashioned, careful, almost obsessive. I opened it right there under the porch light. Inside was a letter. "Dearest new neighbors at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. I've been watching this house for decades now, and it's finally time for it to have young blood again. Your children fill me with excitement. Do they play in the yard yet?" The words crawled under my skin. Watching. Young blood. Daniel thought it was a prank. "Probably some bored kid," he said, tearing the letter in half before I could even process it. But even as he laughed it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever wrote that wasn't done watching us. By the end of our first week, we'd unpacked just enough to start feeling like we lived there. The house creaked a little too much at night, but it was old. That's what old houses do, right? Then came the second letter. It arrived on a Tuesday. Same envelope, same looping handwriting, but this time it was addressed directly to us. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, I see you've begun to settle in. The renovations look wonderful, though I do miss the old wooden fixtures. Did you find all the rooms yet? There are some spaces that only reveal themselves to those who truly know the house. Be patient. It will show you." I remember dropping the paper. It wasn't just the words, it was how the letter mentioned our renovations. We hadn't told anyone, not the neighbors, not even our realtor. We'd only discussed it privately. Daniel's smile faded when he read it. "Okay, that's not funny anymore. We called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. Could be a prank. Maybe someone from the previous owner's circle. Just keep the letters, if any more come." But they didn't stop. Every few days a new envelope appeared, sometimes tucked under the mat, sometimes inside the mailbox. Always signed the same way, The Watcher. "The house knows I am here. It has known me longer than it has known you. I walk by often. The upstairs window looks beautiful at night when your daughter leaves the light on. You still haven't found the secret room, have you?" Each letter felt like a hand tightening around our lives, Daniel started checking the security cameras every night. I began pulling the curtains closed before the sun set. The kids, thank God, didn't know anything. But I started to wonder, was someone really watching? One night as I was tucking our son into bed, he said something that froze my blood. "Mommy," he whispered. "The man by the fence waved at me again." I wanted to ask, what man? But I already knew. That night I didn't sleep. Every creak on the floorboards, every gust of wind brushing the windows, it all sounded deliberate, like the house was listening. By morning I convinced myself my son must have imagined it. Kids do that, right? They make sense of shadows in their own way. But when Daniel left for work, I went outside just to look. Our backyard stretched to an old wooden fence, one of those weathered grayish ones that had probably been there for decades. There were muddy footprints in the grass, not ours, bigger, deeper. They led right up to the fence and stopped. I followed the line with my eyes, and that's when I noticed something carved into the wood. 3 words, small but neat. "I see you." I stepped back so fast I tripped over the garden hose. The letters weren't new. The wood around them was slightly discolored, aged. Whoever wrote it did so a while ago. Maybe before we even moved in. The letters kept coming. Every 2 or 3 days, folded neatly, slipped under the front door like clockwork. No address, no name, just more riddles, more reminders that someone was watching. By now, sleep had become a luxury. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the hallway clock, twisted itself into something threatening. Daniel tried to act brave, but I saw it in his eyes too. The fear was eating at him. We weren't living anymore. We were waiting. Then one evening, while searching the attic for old documents, I noticed something strange. The floorboards near the far corner didn't match the rest. The wood was newer, paler. It looked like it had been replaced recently. I pressed down, hollow. When I pried one open, a cloud of dust rose, and beneath it, a narrow gap leading into darkness. Daniel brought a flashlight. The beam flickered across something that made my stomach twist. A room. A small hidden space, no larger than a closet. But inside were things we thought we'd lost. Our missing photographs, my son's old toy car, even the first torn-up letter back together, the one that had disappeared from our drawer, all lined up neatly on a shelf. There was also a camera, one of the same models we'd installed ourselves, except this one wasn't ours. Its little red light was still blinking. Daniel backed away, breathing hard. This doesn't make sense," he whispered. But before I could answer, something moved inside the vent. A soft scrape, then another, and a voice, low, calm. "You finally found me." We bolted for the door, tearing down the attic stairs, but by the time the police arrived, the space was empty. No camera, nor photographs, just dust, and the faint scent of cologne that wasn't Daniel's. They searched for weeks. Nothing. The detective finally said it must have been some elaborate break-in, but he couldn't explain how the letters started before we moved in. And now, every night, I hear faint footsteps above us, pacing. And sometimes, when the house goes quiet, I swear, I can still hear that voice whispering through the vents. "I see you." Epilogue. Her point of view. It's been 3 months since that night. The attic has been sealed, the locks replaced, the cameras removed, but peace, that never came. Every morning I wake up to find something slightly moved. A mug turned the wrong way, a picture frame tilted. Daniel tells me it's just paranoia, that trauma can play tricks on the mind. But sometimes when he's asleep, I hear someone walking upstairs. Slow, careful, almost as if they don't want to wake him, only me. Last night I found a new letter on the kitchen counter. Same handwriting, same folds. It only said one thing this time. You shouldn't have closed the room. I tore it apart and threw it into the fire, but the smell of burning ink still lingers. Sharp, metallic, unforgettable. And now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel it again. That same presence behind me, watching, waiting, because sometimes evil doesn't haunt the house you live in. It haunts you.